The fire of the Sakas, Tomris Hatun's blood oath, the steppes' winter sleep, and a mother's mourning around 530 BC, near the Aras River. The air carried the last frost of winter. The Saka steppes were silent and vast, like a giant not yet awakened. But beneath this silence, the heart of a nation beat like a bleeding wound. This wound had been opened by the cunning and cruelty of the Persian king Cyrus. Tomris Hatun, that great leader descending from the lineage of Alp-er-Tunga, stood inside her marquee, holding a small wooden horse carved by her son, Spargapises, in his childhood. The burden of queenship she shouldered after her husband's death had turned her into steel, but a mother's grief was powerful enough to crack even her armor. While Cyrus asked for permission to cross the Aras River, he had actually set a trap. The rich feast tables he left behind while retreating had intoxicated the Saka youth, especially Tomris's beloved son, Spargapises. Following the raid that came after the discipline of war was lost to wine, the prince, falling captive, had killed himself in the Persian dungeon to avoid losing his honor. Tomris Hatun turned her eyes to the sky. Tears did not flow. She had frozen her mourning, transforming it into a pure desire for vengeance. It was as if the spirit of the steppe was whispering, "Tomris, pay the price of blood with blood. The price of our honor is Cyrus's life." She placed one hand on her heart and grasped the bronze axe on the table with the other. "Cyrus," she murmured, her voice colder than the winter wind, "you have never had your fill of blood in your life. I promise, you will be satiated with blood by my hand." This was not a declaration of war. This was a mother's oath. Tomris Hatun gathered her chief commanders and tribal lords in her marquee. The map in the center of the tent consisted of simple lines dug into the earth, but every hill, every river bend on it was the hunting ground of the Saka warriors. Cyrus. He relies on the size and order of his army. He thinks we are irregular and savage. We will show him the order of the steppe. Her chief commander, Korgan, spoke with a strong voice. "My lady, the enemy numbers are nearly double ours. A direct frontal war will dry out our blood." Tomris pointed with the tip of her thin spear to a region on the map, a valley surrounded by low hills, narrowing in the middle. "Here is Cyrus's grave. We will not fight from the front. We will hunt." Strategy, the Turan tactic. For the retreat bait, vanguard units of light cavalry would provoke the Persian army in retreat, drawing them into this narrow valley. This retreat would give the appearance of a panicked, weak army. For the concealment of flanks, the Saka army's strongest and most agile mounted archers would wait patiently behind the hills on both sides of the valley, completely out of the Persian sight. For closing the trap, when the Persian army fully entered the valley, the vanguard units would suddenly turn back. Simultaneously, the flanks would cut off the entrance and exit of the valley. The Persian army would be unable to move, unable to breathe. Tomris's eyes gleamed. Cyrus trusts his intellect. We will prove to him, to Cyrus the desert fox, that the Sakas are the wolves of the steppe. Today we will wait patiently. Tomorrow the steppe will be watered with blood. The next day, as the sun rose, the battle had begun. However, this was not the grandiose frontal war Cyrus expected. The Saka vanguards rode their horses at full gallop, approaching the Persian borders, raining arrows, and just as the Persian infantry rallied to counterattack, they would vanish into a cloud of smoke. This was unnerving Cyrus. Cyrus roared at his commanders. "When will this buffoonery end? These savages do not know how to fight. They are afraid. They do not know what a disciplined army is." Cyrus's staff tried to warn him. "Your Majesty, mounted archers are wearing us down. They may be drawing us into terrain of their choosing." Cyrus silenced them with a wave of his hand. "I am Cyrus who defeated Lydia, the Medes and Babylon. A herd of cowards led by a handful of nomad women cannot stop my advance. Advance. Pursue them. Until that woman, that old snake, comes to my feet and begs for mercy." Cyrus was a victim of his own hubris. In his eyes, these people standing against his great empire were merely an undisciplined crowd. Yet every retreat, Every sound of an arrow was tightening the ring of the massive trap Tomris had set. After hours of pursuit, the main body of Cyrus's army entered that narrow, suffocating valley Tomris had marked on the map. The Persian soldiers were tired, thirsty, and angry, but there was no one in front of them anymore. The commanders began shouting cries of victory. They fled. Tomris surrendered out of fear. Cyrus smiled with an expression mixing satisfaction and disgust. The faces of the generals around him were covered in dust, sweat, and impatience. "Look at them!" roared Cyrus, his voice reaching the generals whose lips were cracked from fatigue. "A herd led by a woman. They flee from frontal combat, just kicking up dust and running away. This is not a war, this is a hunt. And we are the hunters." At that moment, from behind the Persian army descending into the valley, that terrifying sound from the deepest depths of the steppe was heard. The thunder of Turan. This was not a single army, but the combination of thousands of horses, thousands of breaths, and the roar of metal cutting the wind. It was as if the earth was splitting in two, summoning the spirit of Turan into that valley. The commanders of the Persian army looked behind them in horror. From the road that was empty just moments ago, Tomris's fastest and fiercest cavalry had launched like the wind itself, completely sealing the valley entrance with a wall of steel. Chaos began in the center of the Persian army. Before they could understand what was happening, the second and third waves of sound crashed into the valley. Death from four sides. The Saka mounted archers hiding on the side hills of the valley appeared like a spreading blizzard. Arrows raining down shattered the orderly ranks of the Persian infantry. Saka arrows targeting unarmored areas like eyes, necks, and underarms created mass panic. The Persians couldn't even see where the arrows were coming from. The turn and collision. The front-line cavalry suddenly halted their retreat and, with a sharp maneuver, turned their horses around to strike a deadly blow to the bewildered Persian vanguards. The Saka riders, with their light armor and agile horses, were a total nightmare for the heavy Persian infantry. War axes, maces, and swords were working over the trapped army like butcher's knives. Cyrus leapt from his palanquin. Surprise gave way to anger, and anger quickly gave way to fear. "Form ranks. Raise your shields. Warriors, fall back," he shouted. But there was nowhere to fall back to. The valley had closed like a throat. The Persian army had fallen victim to its own formation. Those pushed forward crashed into the shields of those behind them, unable to move. The Saka riders were in constant motion, striking and retreating like a snake, then striking again. The battle was no longer a maneuver. It was an act of annihilation. Tomris Hatun stood atop a hill on her horse. The air smelled of iron and blood. The expression on her face combined the determination of a war leader with the coldness of a mother's vengeance. She was here not just to win but to deliver justice. As the sun approached setting, the valley fell into silence. On the ground lay the lifeless bodies of thousands of Persians and just as many Saka warriors. However, the victory indisputably belonged to Tomris. As Saka soldiers cleared the battlefield, a group of soldiers reported Cyrus's location to Tomris Hatun. Cyrus was heavily wounded, his armor shattered and barely recognizable. Tomris Hatun dismounted and walked to Cyrus's side. The Persian king had fallen face down on the soil, struggling to take his last breath. Tomris leaned down. Her tone was eerily calm after the noise of war. "Cyrus, you took Babylon. You crushed Lydia. But you cannot take the steppe. The spirit of the steppe knows how to defy deceit." Cyrus turned his face, a final glint of arrogance in his eyes. "A woman. You defeated me. This will be history's shame." Tomris laughed softly, but it was a bitter laugh. "Shame is written on the forehead of the one who takes an innocent prince's life with deceit, Cyrus. You took my son from me. Until my son's soul finds peace in the sky, my vengeance will not end." Tomris signaled to the commander beside her. The commander severed Cyrus's head with his sword. Then Tomris Hatun had the large leather skin brought forward, which had been prepared beforehand and filled with the blood of newly fallen Persian and Saka soldiers. The skin was as heavy as the blood Cyrus had sought throughout his life. Tomris lifted Cyrus's head by the hair and shoved it into the blood-filled skin until half his head was submerged. Blood dripped from his lips and face. Her eyes on the blood-covered skin, she spoke with a power that echoed across the entire steppe. I am alive and have emerged victorious from the battle. But you killed my son by capturing him with trickery. I made a promise, Cyrus. In your life you were never satiated with blood. Now you are drinking your fill of blood from my hand. Tomris Hatun left the skin there. At that moment she had taken her revenge. She had not only won a war, she had cast the legend of the Persian Empire's invincibility into the dusty wind of the steppe and saved the honor of the Sakas and all nomadic peoples. Tomris Hatun etched her name like a mark of iron into the opening pages of history. The price of blood was paid. The steppe could now sleep in peace.